Welcome to the WEI Tech Talk podcast. I'm your host, Shawn Murphy. I'm a cybersecurity solutions architect here at WEI. And today we're going to dig into the topic of Protective DNS with our special guest, Bart Lenaerts-Bergmans. He's a product marketing manager over at Infoblox, focused on threat intelligence. Bart, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to give a quick intro and share a little bit about your background?
Sure. Thanks, Shawn, for the great introduction. Glad to be here. A little background. So the weird accent that you hear is a Belgian Flemish accent. I'm living in the US now for 25 years. Spent the last 20 years of my career, especially in cybersecurity, as a product manager, especially around SIM, Security Information Event Management. And I have been in threat intelligence the last 8 years. Multiple organizations, Mandiant, CrowdStrike, and now at Infoblox.
I'm super excited to speak with you today. I've been interested in Infoblox's tech for a while. I spent a week getting trained up with your engineers recently. And the reason I'm so bullish on Protective DNS is based on a LinkedIn post I made some time ago. I was listening to one of my favorite cyber podcasts, Security Now, with Steve Gibson, and he goes into this 2-hour-long deep dive into the death of IPv6 and why everyone's still using IPv4. And basically, after this huge analysis of the tech and why it sort of fizzled out, he concludes with a very poignant conclusion that DNS is the new routing protocol for the internet. So you used to think of routing IP addresses, and that's no longer the case. IPs have kind of faded into the background, and now when you're trying to get from a source to a destination, DNS is the medium for that. So I've been learning a lot about like the protocol itself and how it works, and then how you can add protections on top of it. So I'm super excited to dig into things today. But I figured before we jump right into the deep end of the pool with your threat intel background, maybe we should start with some of the basics about, what is the DNS protocol and how does it function, and then maybe we can get into why it's important in the cyber world.
Yeah, cool. Excellent. So great intro here, because DNS is also, and DNS threats are one of the most underreported issues in the industry. We like to think about very complex systems like file detonations and doing advanced threat research, but a lot of research skips over DNS, and there's multiple reasons for it. But what is DNS? DNS, domain name system, was invented, exists already. It started in 1983, was invented as a replacement for, and some people may remember that, but it was a replacement for host.txt files. So you had on a Linux host or Unix host at that moment, a file where you would list the IP addresses and the host names, and then you could use a host name. It was much more easier. But as systems got interconnected, there was another need. And so today, DNS, or the domain name system, is really the telephone book of the internet. That's what it is. It's a telephone book. But it's so much more than a table. Why? Because anytime you make a connection, a browser does do it, or an application does do it, or even an email connection is made. Well, it does do a lookup first of that IP address by looking up the domain name. And it does it do in a very, very smart way, but it gets it then, and then the connection starts. But what can we say out of this is that any connection that is set up or over the internet first proceeds, or is preceded first with a DNS lookup. And so that is so fantastic about it. It is a lookup, and it gives you the information back, and then the connection starts. So it's a great point of interception. Mm-hmm. And that's the interesting thing about DNS.
Yeah, so you covered the protocol well. I like the phone book analogy. That makes perfect sense to me. So if you want to get anywhere on the internet, nobody remembers phone numbers
Yeah.
anymore. You use a phone book to look up the destination and get there in the first place. And you sort of touched on how threats use that phone book too. Can you share a little bit about how threat actors depend on
Yeah.
DNS as their
Yeah.
infrastructure?
Sure. So there are multiple ways, but I would love to tell first a little bit more about how does DNS work, because it's
Mm,
important to explain that a little bit before we can jump into the threat actors. So if we think about how DNS work, then there are two sort of elements. There's the first element, which is the resolving itself. So your system does do a DNS query to a resolver, and then the resolver will go and do recursive lookup, will go to a root DNS server and then a top level domain server until it finds really the server where that domain is registered then, or where that domain lives, and then it will send an IP back. That is the resolving itself. There's a first set of threats that are possible against this, and we'll cover those. And there's another set that is required to make DNS work, and that is the registration. So before your DNS server or your domain name becomes active, you have to register it. So there are multiple steps. And what actors do, they are using both of these elements. First of all, the resolving as well as registration in their own benefits. And so there are multiple ways how they're doing this. The first one is a very, very well-known, it's a lookalike site. What is a lookalike site? Well, you've seen it. It's the same instead of www.google.com, it are two, instead of the O's, it are zeros. That's a very well-known one, an example. But they're much, much more complex, like using Cyrillic alphabet. It's almost the same. Or you're going to do typo squatting. A typo squatting is that you're changing a letter, or you're changing it with instead of .com, .net, or a dash in the middle. Very, very, very similar looking domains. And why do actors do this? To make their attempt to make their domain or make their connection look legitimate, right? It's about deceiving users. And it's about also abusing the brand, because we all are trust the brand to a certain area, and actors like to abuse the brand in the domain name services to make their attacks more credible. The second one is a little bit more typical around DNS, and that is what I would call domain hijacking. So when you register a domain and you define where your top level domain is, or where how your domain delegation is working, there's always a capability that you set it up in the wrong way, or that an operative DNS server, as it is called, may go inactive, but that domain still exists. And actors can use that. And what they do is basically they're going to steal that domain and you abuse that domain. There are other techniques how actors are abusing it. Another one is traffic distribution system. That is something that's become very, very strong and very prevalent. What's a traffic distribution system? It's basically a lot of those C names combined together, and you do redirect, redirect, redirect. So continuously redirection can be dozens in a sequence, and it basically, based on where you're coming from, the redirection is going to change based where you're coming from, but also based on your browser type, based on your operating system, on some of the settings that you have in your browser. You're going to be redirected. And this allows the actor now to really target their ideal victims and say, these are the victims I want, this OS, this interest, I'm going to redirect them to this malicious site. But other that are less of interest or known, let's say, IP address, or I'm going to redirect them to a decoy site. And that is something that's done today, especially to mislead the threat research teams.
Yeah, and that leads into one of my big questions that I wanted to pick your brain about because at the training that I attended, I got to eat dinner with some of your threat intel analysts and pick their brain about the traffic distribution systems and the emerging threats that they're
Yeah.
they're tracking on the internet. And I guess my question for you is, what's the role of threat intel in protective DNS, and how do you enforce blocks before the threat gets in the front door?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. I'll try to take it in two pieces.
Yeah.
Earlier in when we were had this conversation, we're talking about two components how DNS is working. You have the registration, and you have the resolving. So one is really how the service is really working. The other one is how you set it up. Well, what happens is that during both of these phases, there are a lot of breadcrumbs that are left behind. And the breadcrumbs are things like where was this domain registered? By who was it registered? When was it registered? What time of day was it registered? What infrastructure does it point to? What infrastructure type of infrastructure does the domain point to? Were there other known facts around this infrastructure? Um, so there's a lot of information you immediately can see when a domain was registered. If you combine that now with the telemetry that a vendor like Infoblox has, we're talking about 13,000 customers, trillions of DNS queries that we see day by day. This gives an immense number of or opportunity of insight. So great telemetry. And so what the threat intelligence team does do now is out of this, it's going to distill out a reputation, classification of a domain name with the threat context around it. So it's going to say, oh, this is malicious, and here's the reasons before it and the specific rating for this. Here's the reason why, because it was very recently created domain, or the domain is being used in others. Type of this domain has been used in other threats. So it's going to give that. And then what the threat intel team especially is going to do is it's going to try to create specific clusters around this, saying, oh, these domains all seem to come from the same type of actor. And so that cluster then can lead to graduation of an actor saying this specific, this is a specific actor that uses domains in a specific factor for this type of attacks. And so we have things like prolific Puma as an example. That's an actor that does do a link shortening services by using domains. Or there's Vextrio Viper, which is an actor that is specialized in setting up TDS. So we have total, I think, over 100 actors that we name. You can read about them, but it helps to build up deep insights into the threats, going from very tactical intelligence. What are the specific indicators that are seen as malicious? The actors who are operationalizing this and how they use this, to global trends. And that's like more strategic intelligence and finished intelligence, how specific threats are being evolved. So that's great information. That's great information that's being produced for other intelligence team, security teams, but you can also then activate that more via protective DNS. And so Protective DNS is one of those new capabilities that can activate this threat intelligence and to help organizations protect against this. There's a lot here, but yeah, that's in brief. From going from raw information to really actionalizing the information for security teams.
Yeah, you mentioned attribution, and that's always something that security teams aspire to, because if you know who's trying to breach your organization, you can better defend against the threat. And that reminds me of the concept in threat intel of the pyramid of pain,
Yeah,
which is this idea that threat actors have infrastructure. They're like, at this point, they're full-size enterprises. They have lots of different
100%.
uh, analysts who have different functions and different specialties, and they work together as a team to breach an enterprise and steal targeted information. And that infrastructure is more or less difficult to change. It's very easy to change IP addresses. It's very easy to change the hash of a piece of malware that you're delivering. But to your point, the registration process for a domain is time consuming and costs money. And so it's more difficult to change that domain infrastructure. So if they're reusing it, and you as Infoblox, the vendor, can see that it's being used in other campaigns, that can connect the dots and help you identify the threats, but also attribute the threat actor and what they're after in the end. Very
Right.
interesting stuff.
Yeah. And what is unique actually about DNS derived intelligence is that actors set up this infrastructure days, weeks, sometimes months in advance of an attack. And that is really unique. It's really more of a left of boom play versus a right of boom play. So when you think about traditional endpoint protections or even network behavior analysis tools, network detections, it is usually always triggered, or it starts detecting when a threat is being delivered. And that's great, right? But an actor always starts weeks to months in advance. And they start usually very early on, where it starts when they set up their DNS infrastructure. An actor today, a threat actor today, they are just buying tools left and right. And they can buy an info stealer like Luma Stealer as an example, or get access to this. They set up a domain, whatever, they set up a malicious server, they get it delivered via TDS. But that infrastructure that they set up is something that happens way before the attack. And so by detecting that malicious infrastructure, you can stop threats way advance of when they really are happening. And what we're doing actually is you're taking away the unlimited supply that actors have today of tools or infrastructure or even domain names to execute your attack. So you're taking away their logistics, and that really helps much better in protecting security environments later on. A great example, recently there was a CVE that came out. Kaspersky did a threat research. It was a 0-day against Chrome. I forget the right name. I believe it was CVE 8723, I think. We just published a blog on it. Anyway, Kaspersky detected it in the middle of March, and the patch came out at the end of March when Google delivered it. We detected the domain through which, and the site through which it was delivered already on the 5th of February. So if you had just Protective DNS enabled, we would stop users accessing that site. And that gives you now protection 40 plus day in advance of the attack and in advance of the patch being delivered. And their right is the value of Protective DNS, I would say.
Yeah, and you touched on a concept that we use all the time at WEI to educate our customers and our sales teams about how to do cyber right. Because for a long time, cyber was focused on detecting the threats as quickly as possible after they happened and then responding to them, performing your investigation and doing some forensics and figuring out what happened. But I love the idea of left of boom because that mitigates the risk before it's ever hit the company.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the right way to do security. Of course, you need monitoring controls and you need to be able to rerun the tape and figure out what happened historically. But if you can protect the organization, that reduces all the alerts that you have to go investigate and all the forensics that you have to do, and drives down risk, which is ultimately what we're here to do. So that sort of dovetails into a question that I had about other security controls. Why not just use your EDR agent to protect against malicious DNS or your firewall infrastructure? What's unique about DNS's position in the network?
Yeah. You bring up a good point. Ultimately, you need both, right? Ultimately, you need, and I think there's a general during World War I who said, soldiers win the battle, logistics or disrupting the logistics wins the war. And DNS can play in both, right? DNS, you can use it during an investigation, during a response, looking up the domain, where did it came from, when was it set up, how malicious is this? So you're using it as you're using it for doing the investigation and mitigation. But if you can block in advance, then you take away that logistics. Why are traditional tools not doing this? Well, there's a little bit of history. And it's just the way how traditional tools are working. So a firewall, SASE, endpoint, EDR vendors, these are what we call network security, deep packet inspection, right? And on the other side, you have endpoint protection. Endpoint protection is really agent-based. They look at what is happening at the endpoint. They're looking when something has been delivered. They're gonna do sandboxing on it. They're gonna investigate it. Then they're gonna create a signature for this, or another way, another file update, the channel update, as some vendors called it. That was describing a very suspicious behavior on endpoint, but it's mostly always known, so you're going to block on a known bad behavior or a known signatures. And so you're looking always at the last mile, when it has arrived and when it arrived at your doorstep. Network security, same thing. It's going to look at deep packet inspection. For that, it needs a lot of process and use of power. It's going to look at the unique data. Often they skip DNS. Why? Because it's very, very hard to decide what is right and what is not right. But they're going to do deep packet inspection, look at the payloads, and then the finding on that, they're going to say, no, block it. So it's always based detection, and the intelligence is based on known behaviors. And it's necessary. This is just how security worked, how it started a decade or 2 decades ago. But today, there are the creation of cloud computing, the creation of big data analysis, the existence of all those new capabilities, and the emergence of threat intelligence inside the security industry has created far better and smarter ways to start detecting and preemptive stop things. And so this is where DNS threat intelligence comes in, because you're not looking again at that last payload, but you're looking at when the domain was created. Again, you need both. You need to win the battle that a certain actor, when a certain actor is in, already is in, and you need to eliminate that actor, and DNS can help with there. But to win the war, it's really about interrupting the logistics and stopping the actor from abusing certain domains, basically. And that is something that the form of threat intelligence, the telemetry, that is something that where Infoblox has a very, very unique insight into it, and where we are really playing much, much more left of boom compared to where other vendors are.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I know I came from the firewall world. I worked at one of the big next-gen firewall solution providers, and we had limitations about how many blocks we could enforce on the firewall, because it has to make real-time packet decisions about whether or not it's going to let it through or not. And there's only so much memory buffer you've got on a piece of physical infrastructure. So it makes sense to me that you you maintain that block list in your DNS infrastructure, and that's way more performant than pushing that into the firewall. So that sort of goes into my next question, which is what's special or unique about Infoblox approach to threat intelligence and infusing it in their products and services? Can you share a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So the first place, Infoblox has been around for a while, has been the leader in offering DNS solutions. And out of this, they became the leader in DDI, DNS, DHCP, and then IPAM, which is your address management around this. And then recently over the last 5-6 years, Infoblox did set up a data science team and an intelligence team. The data science really was trying to find more the needle in the haystacks, and trying to find like really what is abnormal. They spent a lot of effort on that. Large infrastructure, really about large databases and inspecting it on a continuously basis. But then also, once they found things, then doing why are actors doing this? And that's what threat research is and what the threat intelligence team is. And so they identified threats, but they went more and by creating their own actors and defining the different type of ways actors are abusing DNS. And out of this, they distilled out threat intelligence with a very, very high quality. We're talking about false positive rates of 0.0002%. The other thing that we really focus on is protection before engagement. So we really monitor our own threat intelligence on, we're going to block this, we detect this, we're going to start blocking this. And then when do we see the actor now start using this? And we're getting to protection before engagement of 75%. This means that 75% of the threat intelligence that we produce has been created, distributed before the actor engages. So it's really about predictive threat intelligence, not tactical intelligence. Not something that is done like what traditional endpoint vendors are doing, but really predictive intelligence. And that, of course, is where, again, the value is of some of the threat intelligence that we provide. We've booked some great success with this. The last thing that we are now working on is really getting more boost in the industry around protective DNS. So protective DNS is a very, very broad word for saying it's a service to enhance the safety of your internet usage by analyzing the DNS queries and then taking actions. But there are multiple gradations into this. You can say, oh, I'm just going to protect, or I'm just going to inspect. And so we're actively working in the industry with other vendors to get it more standardized. So there's a new standard coming out. Actually, it's in draft right now. The NIST SP 800-81. There's a new revision of that coming out soon. And so we're actively working in contributing to that standard and specifying what the best practices are. The other thing that we're doing is we're expanding our products to make the adoption of protective DNS much, much more easier. What does it mean is that if you go to the networking team and say, we're going to inspect all your DNS traffic, a lot of them will say, stop. This is a risk to us. Why? Because you're going to redirect maybe my DNS traffic, which may include additional delays, or there could be additional resiliency issues, whatever. And so a lot of teams will say, hold on. And what we're doing is now we're going to make it much, much more easier for users to start adopting this. So first of all, detect only without any redirection. So purely the detection of malicious activity inside your DNS traffic. And then we're going to give you tools so you can start doing your investigation, mitigation. You start with basic protection, and then you can start configuring your own policies around it. So it's really allowing the customer to start their journey into protective DNS and getting that full benefit of stopping threats before they arrive. Because that is going to save later on a lot of time and effort and unnecessary security incidents and even breaches that could happen around this.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Well, circling back to the NIST framework, I planned on bringing that up because one of our practice areas here at WEI is zero trust. We think that should be a guiding principle for building more secure networks. And I'm super excited that they're updating the protective DNS portion of that NIST framework, because it's part of the zero trust conversation. Everyone thinks of firewalls and SASE, but DNS infrastructure sees a lot of threats. To your point, the 75% number that you threw out earlier, that sort of blows my mind, because that's 75% of the threats that your firewall doesn't even see, because they're just not returned a valid IP address. So the host machine's not even going to communicate through the firewall. So there's a huge subset of threats that are just filtered out before they even go through your existing security controls. I think that's very interesting. But going back to the protective DNS topic, I imagine NIST, as they typically do, they publish these very high ideals about what we should do to protect our organizations, but they usually are light on details for how to actually achieve that. So what are some challenges that organizations will face when they try to go down this path of protective DNS? And you sort of touched on them there.
So it takes time, because what are the challenges? I would say the first challenge, and one of the most important, is that a lot of security teams are not network specialists. And they think when security specialists or security analysts, they think about a certain threat, they see about an activity, but few have really in-depth knowledge about DNS. And so what we need to do in the first place is, when we report on an incident, when we report on an event, give all the threat context around this. So that is one of the goals also of protected DNS, is that detect early on, detect when the activity is, but provide all the threat context, like who is the actor, what's the name, how are they using this, how big is this, and then when you have that information, allow them to pivot also into a threat hunting. Threat hunting is becoming very much more important. Why? Because security teams know that their security controls are not always effective, and they assume the breach, they assume the intrusion, right? And so DNS, again, when you have an actor, when you have actor profiles, when you have known, what I would call known campaigns, you can start pivoting from your indicator to an actor to now a lot of other indicators that are known around this, to see are there other indicators that are known around this actor that are maybe active. But so the challenges is knowledge. The challenge is threat context. So that you can expand into other practices in your SOC. And then another challenge, and I think that's the most urgent today, is get beyond the approval from the networking team and the IT architects. Today, a lot of organizations, they have their security team and they have their networking or IT team, and they're not always talking to each other. And as a vendor, you talk to one, but not always to the other, and it are different conversations. And so we allow, by providing an infrastructure as well as providing security solutions, to have a much better bridge between those two. And so that's one of the things that especially we want to get going with protected DNS, is enable security teams to understand everything that's going on the networking side, and allow the networking teams also to protect their DNS infrastructure much more efficiently without always talking to their security teams. So that's one of the challenges that we want to get solved. But in short, what are the challenges? It's isolate or separate groups inside organizations, the knowledge, and then today I was just reading the latest SANS reports that's going to come out soon about the evolution in threats and threat intelligence. And tactical threat intelligence is still used, yes, it's a must-have, but security teams want to go beyond, and they really want to see things like a threat landscape. They want to see, well, what is happening in this part of the IT world? How are actors abusing this? And so bring that not only specialized knowledge, but then this threat knowledge around the specific field of DNS to security teams is, I definitely think, one of the big opportunities that we have ahead of us.
Awesome. And then I know the focus of this conversation has been DNS, but there are other cool features. You sort of touched on it. Part of DDI is IPAM, which is a host of information about the endpoints on your network. And you mentioned context being really important for threat hunting and for security teams, and that the assets insights capability of Infoblox is very interesting. But that's probably, we should save that for a separate conversation because that's a whole nother can of worms. But I just wanted to point out that there's other areas where threat intelligence can be infused into data that Infoblox has. I guess that's super helpful background on some of the challenges that folks may face. I should mention WEI has expertise in Infoblox and in security operations, and we know how to kind of bridge those two worlds. So we're happy to help. But what about on the Infoblox side? Where can the audience find more information or background about what Infoblox is up to?
Yeah, multiple paths. So the first, we have a dedicated micro site, especially around threat intelligence. So infoblox.com/threatintel is a specialized portal, especially around our research. Another area where you can go to is Mastodon. We have a specific channel on Mastodon as well as on LinkedIn.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Bart. I appreciate the conversation today. So for a reminder for all the listeners out there, please subscribe to the WEI Tech Talk podcast. You can find WEI at WEI.com and on LinkedIn. You can also find Infoblox and Bart on LinkedIn and the Mastodon channel that he mentioned earlier. Thank you very much for the time today, Bart. Appreciate the conversation.